Epilogue: The future of the European Union. The end of the illusion. The European Union will not collapse in a single moment, nor will it fall to an external enemy. There will be no tanks in Brussels, no flag lowered in a televised ceremony, no formal declaration of failure. What is ending instead is something far more fragile and far more important: the belief that the Union acts in the name of its peoples. The Russia-Ukraine conflict did not create this crisis, it exposed it. For decades, the European project relied on a delicate bargain. Citizens accepted a gradual transfer of sovereignty upward in exchange for prosperity, stability, and peace. Decisions became more technocratic, more distant, and less accountable. But as long as living standards rose and crises remained abstract, the arrangement held. Consent was passive, but it was real. Ukraine shattered that equilibrium. For the first time, the Union demanded not only compliance, but sacrifice, open-ended financial sacrifice, enforced through debt, taxes, legal circumvention, and moral coercion. It asked populations facing inflation, energy insecurity, and industrial decline to fund a war they don't control, in a country they cannot audit, through institutions they cannot sanction. And when questions were asked, the answers were not persuasion, but discipline. Budgets were bypassed, vetoes were neutralized, courts were elevated above parliaments, speech was reframed as delegitimization, audits became paper shields. The principle of unanimity, once the last democratic break, was treated as an obstacle to be engineered around. What emerged was not solidarity, but compulsion without accountability. This is the moment the EU ceased to function as a voluntary political community and began to resemble what its critics had long warned against: a system that governs for the people, but no longer by them. The financial dimension made this transformation irreversible. Joint debt without joint trust is unsustainable. Once taxpayers believe that money disappears into untraceable networks, that elites are insulated from liability, and losses are socialized while gains remain private, the social contract dissolves. No regulation can repair that, no narrative can override it. The golden toilet scandals matter not because of their vulgarity, but because of what they symbolize: a ruling class that expects obedience while exempting itself from consequence. Once that image takes hold, legitimacy drains rapidly. And legitimacy, not law, is what ultimately governs complex systems. Externally, the EU discovered that lawfare cuts both ways. By weaponizing finance and property rights against Russia, it exposed the fragility of the very order it depends on. Reserve currencies rely on predictability. Contracts rely on neutrality. When those foundations are politicized, capital does not protest, it leaves. Markets, unlike voters, do not negotiate. Internally, the EU is learning that militant democracy is a contradiction that can only be managed temporarily. You can suppress dissent, freeze accounts, monitor speech, and expand security perimeters, but every such action confirms the accusation it seeks to defeat. Power enforced without consent does not stabilize a system. It accelerates its hollowing out. What remains then is not collapse, but regression. The EU will survive as a structure, but not as a superstate. It will retreat to the lowest level of integration that member states are willing to fund voluntarily. Defense, debt, energy, and taxation will renationalize, not because of ideology, but because trust has been exhausted. The EU will continue to exist on paper while power migrates back to capitals. Courts become battlefields, and cooperation becomes transactional. What we are witnessing is not the sudden death of the European Union, but its forced regression. The superstate dream has collided with the hard limits of legitimacy. Budget defiance, legal fragmentation, national liability claims, and opt-outs are not temporary crises. They are adaptive behaviors. Member states are learning successfully that Brussels authority ends where enforcement becomes unaffordable. History suggests this outcome is not unique, nor is it tragic by default. Systems that overreach often shrink before they reform. Empires dissolve into federations. Federations devolve into alliances. What matters is whether the retreat is peaceful or resentful, orderly or chaotic. The unresolved danger lies not in decentralization, but in denial. If Europe's leaders continue to treat dissent as pathology rather than signal, and if they believe systems can endure indefinitely without consent, then the future of the Union will not be decided by Russia, markets, or courts, but by the quiet withdrawal of belief from below. Democracy usually does not die when it is attacked. It dies when it is invoked, but no longer practiced. That, more than any battlefield outcome in Ukraine, is the storm on the horizon for Europe. Ukraine will remain the historical accelerant, not because Europe supported it, but because it did so without restraint, without audit, and without democratic authorization. The perception, now deeply rooted, that European taxpayers were converted into guarantors of an unaccountable system, both in Brussels and Ukraine, has done more damage to European unity than any Russian missile ever could. Regrettably, the prospect for peace in the Russia-Ukraine conflict appears increasingly bleak. As of January 2026, data and expert analysis indicate that a comprehensive peace settlement remains unlikely, with the conflict widely anticipated to persist throughout the year. Despite increased diplomatic activity and negotiators' claims that a deal is nearly finalized, fundamental disagreements, particularly regarding territorial concessions and security guarantees, have created an insurmountable impasse. Key obstacles remain prominent. Territorial disputes, core disagreements over borders persist, irreconcilable demands. Both sides view the conflict in existential terms, leaving little room for compromise. Lack of trust and escalation. Mutual distrust prevents meaningful de-escalation. Furthermore, Vladimir Putin has expressed frustration with existing peace settlement efforts, asserting that they fail to adequately address Russia's security concerns. Consequently, he has publicly stated that the most probable path forward for the special military operation remains a military one. I will conclude on a personal note. I sincerely hope peace prevails in Ukraine, and I agree that this war should never have begun. I place significant hope in the imminent changes facing the European Union. These structural shifts within the EU may provide the necessary leverage to bring an end to this conflict and usher in a better future for the peoples of Europe. I wish you all happiness and prosperity.